Botched execution. Inmate gasps for 2 hours. The Joseph Wood tragedy. You think you know what an execution looks like. A quiet, clinical end, usually over in a matter of minutes. A necessary, if tragic, final act of the justice system. But what happens when that clinical end becomes a chaotic, horrifying spectacle? What happens when the silence of the death chamber is broken not by a final sigh, but by a sound described by witnesses as a fish gulping for air? A sound of a man fighting for the very breath a state was trying to take away. On July 23, 2014, in Florence State Prison, Arizona, Joseph Rudolph Wood III was scheduled to die. His sentence: death by lethal injection for a brutal double murder. What followed was not justice. It was not peace. It was a nearly 2-hour struggle. An hour and 57 minutes where Wood, strapped to a gurney, snorted, gasped, and fought to breathe. A horrifying procedure that multiple witnesses called utterly botched. This is the terrifying story of Joseph Wood, the man, the murders, and the agonizing, slow-motion death that shook the American justice system and brought the words cruel and unusual punishment back into the darkest spotlight. Please like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. The crimes that sealed his fate. To understand the final, desperate struggle of Joseph Wood, we have to look back at the unforgivable violence that put him on that gurney. The victims: a woman named Deborah Dietz, 29, and her father, Eugene Dietz, 55. Wood and Deborah had a volatile 5-year relationship, one marked by numerous breakups and, critically, multiple domestic violent incidents. By 1989, Deborah had made the decision to break free. She got an order of protection against Wood. She tried to move on, working at the family's body shop in Tucson. But on August 7, 1989, Wood walked into that shop, armed with a .38 caliber revolver. This was not a plea for reconciliation. This was a final, horrific act of control. He waited for Eugene Dietz, Deborah's 55-year-old father, to hang up the phone. Then Wood opened fire. A single shot to the chest, killing Eugene instantly. Wood then turned to Deborah. He subdued her, held her, and shot her twice, once in the abdomen and once in the chest. Another life brutally extinguished. When Wood finally fled, he was immediately confronted by 2 police officers. He briefly dropped his weapon, only to pick it up again and point it at the officers. They returned fire, striking him several times. Wood survived the resulting surgery, only to face the full weight of the law. Convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault. His sentence: death. The precedent and the problem: drugs. Fast forward 25 years. Wood's appeals have run out. The date is set for July 23, 2014. But there was a critical, terrifying difference in this execution. It wasn't just the man on the gurney. It was the drugs in the IV bag. You see, pharmaceutical companies, many of them European, had, for years, been refusing to sell their drugs for use in executions. This created a massive supply shortage for states that practiced the death penalty. The solution? New, often untested, experimental combinations. In Wood's case, Arizona planned to use a 2-drug cocktail: midazolam and hydromorphone. Midazolam is a sedative meant to render the inmate unconscious. Hydromorphone is a powerful opioid meant to stop breathing and cause death. But the use of midazolam was already under intense scrutiny. Just 6 months earlier, in Ohio, an inmate named Dennis McGuire had his execution described as botched. He had snorted, gasped, and convulsed for 25 minutes. Wood's attorneys, Dale Bache among them, were terrified of history repeating itself. They filed motions, arguing that this experimental protocol would violate the 8th Amendment, the constitutional guarantee against cruel and unusual punishment. The court, however, lifted the temporary stay. The execution would proceed, and the world was about to witness a nightmare that seemed entirely preventable. The 2-hour nightmare begins. At 1:52 p.m. local time, the execution of Joseph Wood began. The drugs were administered. Initially, according to witnesses, it seemed to be going normally. Wood closed his eyes. It was observed that after about 11 minutes, things changed. His lip quivered. A minute later he gasped. Then again, and again. Michael Kiefer, a reporter who had witnessed 5 prior executions, described the sound as a deep, snoring, sucking air sound. He told reporters afterward, usually it takes about 10 minutes. The person goes to sleep. This was not that ... It took 2 hours. Media witness Troy Hayden likened Wood's breathing to a fish gulping for air. One reporter estimated Wood gasped more than 600 times. This wasn't a quick or quiet transition. It was a prolonged, visible, and audible struggle. Wood's lawyer, Dale Bache, later recounted that the Department of Corrections announced 7 times during the process that Wood was still sedated. Why? Because he was still breathing, still struggling. By an hour into the procedure, Wood's legal team was frantically filing an emergency motion to the Supreme Court. The motion was chillingly simple. He is still alive. This execution has violated Mr. Wood's 8th Amendment right. We respectfully request that this court stop the execution. But Justice Anthony Kennedy denied the appeal. The word came half an hour after Wood had been pronounced dead. The execution was concluded at 3:49 p.m. 1 hour and 57 minutes after it began. Almost 2 hours of gasping, struggling, and snorting. Experts said it should have taken about 10 minutes. The response and the victim's pain, the sheer brutality of the duration, immediately sparked outrage and debate. Governor Jan Brewer ordered a review of Arizona's execution procedures, saying she was concerned by the length of time it took to carry out the lethal injection. But the narrative quickly fractured. The Department of Corrections stood by its protocol, stating that aside from sonorous respiration or snoring, Wood did not grimace or move. They insisted he was comatose and never in pain or distress. However, the most powerful and heartbreaking testimony came from the family of the victims. Wood's final words, delivered to the Dietz family, were a cold finality. I take comfort knowing today my pain stops, and I said a prayer that on this or any other day you may find peace in all of your hearts, and may God forgive you all. He even smiled at them. Jean Brown, Deborah Dietz's sister, and Eugene's daughter, was there. Her response cut through all the legal and medical debate. She said, "What I saw today with him being executed, it is nothing compared to what happened on August 7th, 1989. You don't know what excruciating is. What's excruciating is seeing your dad laying there in a pool of blood, seeing your sister laying there in a pool of blood. This man deserved it. For her, the long, drawn-out death was merely a fraction of the suffering Wood had inflicted on her family and a lifetime of suffering that remained.